So, this is an interesting article to read, and I'm going to read it because it is related to the DNA that is inherited from Neanderthals that may increase risk of COVID-19. And so, I'm going to read this article because this is what I came across. And this article specifically states that DNA inherited from Neanderthals may increase the risk of COVID-19. So the stretch of 6 genes seems to increase the risk of severe illness from the coronavirus. And so here's what looks like a researcher excavating the Neanderthal skeleton last year. So this is by a Carl Zimmer, published July 4th of 2020. So it's been updated July 8th of 2020. So a stretch of DNA linked to COVID-19 was passed down from Neanderthals 60,000 years ago, according to the new study. So scientists don't yet know why this particular segment increases the risk of severe illness from the coronavirus. But the new findings, which were posted online on a Friday and have not yet been published in the scientific journal, show how some clues to modern health stem from ancient history. So this interbreeding is what it's called, effect that happened 60,000 years ago is still having an impact even today, said Joshua Aki. So a geneticist at Princeton University who was not involved in the study, but the piece of the genome, which spans 6 genes on the chromosomes 3, has had a puzzling journey through human history, the study found. So the variant is now common in Bangladesh, where 63% of the people carry at least one copy of this genome. Across all of South Asia, almost 1/3 of the people have inherited the segment. Elsewhere, however, the segment is far less common. Only 8% of Europeans carry it, and just 4% have it in East Asia. It is almost completely absent in Africa. Let me read that again. It is almost completely absent in Africa. It's not clear what evolutionary pattern produced this distribution over the past 60,000 years. That's $10,000 question, said Hugo Zerberg, a geneticist at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. So who was one of the authors of the new study. So one possibility is that Neanderthal version is harmful and has been getting rarer overall. I don't know why I was thinking, in my head I was thinking hunter-gatherer. I was thinking about that when I had read that in a book about hunter-gatherers. So then let me read that again. One possibility is that the Neanderthal version is harmful and has been getting rarer overall. Okay, so it's also possible that the segment improved people's health in South Asia, perhaps providing a strong immune response to the viruses in the region. Okay, so I guess this is the coronavirus outbreak and the latest updates. And so I guess you can see them here, but you can look at them in your own time. So one should stress that at this point, this is pure speculation, okay, said Dr. Zerberg, co-author Svante Pabo, the director of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany. So researchers are only beginning to understand why COVID-19 is more dangerous to some people than others. Older people are more likely to become severely ill than younger ones, Men are more at risk than women are. Socially, inequality matters as well too. So in the United States, black people are far more likely than white people to become severely ill from the coronavirus, for example, most likely due in part to the country's history of systemic racism. So it has left black people with a high rate of chronic disease such as diabetes, as well as living conditions and jobs that may increase exposure to the virus. So genes play a role as well. So last month, researchers compared people in Italy and in Spain who became very sick with COVID to those who had only mild infections, and they found two places in the genome associated with a greater risk. One is the chromosome 9, includes ABO, a gene that determines blood types. So I've heard that in some articles that certain blood types might be associated with who gets a severe case of COVID-19 than others. So the other is the Neanderthal segment of the chromosome 3. So, which again, when we spoke of certain places, Africa was completely absent of that. And so it talked about Bangladesh, where 63% of the people carry at least one copy. Across South Asia, almost 1/3 of the people have inherited the segment. And elsewhere, however, the segment is far less common. Only 8% of European carry it, and just 4% of the East Asia, and it's almost completely absent in Africa. So let's go back to where I was. Okay. And so it is saying, but these genetic findings are being rapidly updated as more people get infected with the coronavirus that are in their studies. So just last week, an international group of scientists called the COVID-19 Host Genetics Initiative released a new set of data downplaying the risks of the blood type. So the jury is still out on ABO, said Mark Daly, a geneticist at Harvard Medical School who is a member of the initiative. So the new data showed an even stronger link between the disease and the chromosome 3 segment. People who carry two copies of the variant are 3 times more likely to suffer the severe illness than people who do not. So after the new batch of data came out on Monday, Dr. Zuberg decided to find out if the chromosome 3 segment has passed down from Neanderthals. So about 60,000 years ago, some ancestors of modern humans expanded out of Africa, and they swept across Europe, Asia, and Australia. These people encountered Neanderthals and interbred with them, meaning they slept with them and had babies with them. And then as time passed, once Neanderthals' DNA entered our gene pool, it spread down through the generations long after Neanderthals became extinct. So most Neanderthal genes turned out to be harmful to modern humans. They have or may have been a burden on people's health or made it harder to have children altogether. So as a result, Neanderthal genes became rarer and many disappeared from the gene pool and from our gene pools. But some genes appear to have provided an evolutionary edge and have become quite common. So in May, Dr. Zuberg, Dr. Pavel, and Dr. Janet Kelso, also of the Max Planck Institute, discovered that 1/3 of European women have a Neanderthal hormone receptor. It is associated with increased, let me read that again. Dr. Zuberg, this was in May, Dr. Pabo and Dr. Janet Kelso, also of the Max Planck Institute, discovered that 1/3 of European women have a Neanderthal hormone receptor. It is also associated with increased fertility and fewer miscarriages. Okay, so Dr. Zuberg knew that other Neanderthal genes that are common today even help us fight viruses. So when modern humans expanded into Asia and Europe, they may have encountered new viruses against the Neanderthals, which the Neanderthals had already evolved defenses. So we have held on to these genes ever since. And so Dr. Zberg looked at chromosome 3 in the online database of Neanderthal genomes. So he found that the version that raises people's risk of COVID-19 is the same version found in Neanderthals who lived in Croatia 50,000 years ago. So I texted Savante immediately. Dr. Zberg said in an interview referring to Dr. Pabo. Dr. Pabo was on vacation in a cottage in the remote Swedish countryside. Dr. Zberg showed up the next day, and they worked day and night until they posted the study online on Friday. So it's the most crazy vacation I have ever had in the cottage, Dr. Pabo said. And so Tony Capra, a geneticist of Vanderbilt University, who was not involved in the study, thought it was plausible that Neanderthal chunk of DNA originally provided a benefit, perhaps even against other viruses, but that was 40,000 years ago. And here we are now, he said. It's possible that an immune response that worked against ancient viruses has ended up overreacting against the new coronavirus. So people who develop severe cases of COVID-19 typically do so because their immune systems launch uncontrolled attacks that end up scarring their lungs and causing inflammation. So Dr. Poabo said that the DNA segment may account in part for why people in Bangladesh descent are dying at a higher rate of COVID-19 in the United Kingdom. So it's an open question whether this Neanderthal segment continues to keep a strong link to COVID-19. Dr. Zberg and other researchers study more patients, and it may take discoveries of the segment in the ancient fossils of modern humans to understand why it became so common in some places but not others. But Dr. Zberg said that 60,000 years of journey of this chunk of DNA in our species might help explain why it's so dangerous today. So its evolutionary history may give us some clues, Dr. Zberg said. So this is what I came across, which was really, really interesting. And what I noticed is that they mentioned something about blood types. And then I remember hearing Dr. Fossey saying that if you take vitamin C and vitamin D, certain vitamins may aid in your fight against the disease. I also heard an update that Johnson & Johnson, they worked on a trial vaccine and they have stronger immune results from their vaccine. And so that's one that I heard that was a really strong possibility that one might be released possibly relatively soon because it gave strong immune response. And so I know that there were several different companies that were working on vaccines. And so that was one that was for sure promising. I think there was Remdesivir is the one that's used for emergency purposes, and I think it's in hospitals, because that was the first one. Then I heard something called Moderna, if I'm saying it correctly, and then there's the one by Johnson & Johnson. So there's Pfizer, and then there's some others, and so there's several different individuals that are individual company parent companies that are working on trials, and there have been some that have been more successful than others, and so they've been working in light speed, warp speed, let's put it that way, to try to get this vaccine out. And they say there could be one released close to the end of the year, and then there's some people saying close to the end of next year. It depends on which one of these have more positive results of immunity to this virus. And so reading this, I thought it was interesting. And so DNA may play a good part in this, the blood types, things like that, because you notice that some people get really, really, really sick, and we do know that if people have pre-existing illnesses, that the possibility of getting sick from something else they're catching is a lot stronger. That doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that one out, because if you're already compromised health-wise and then you get sick with something else, and then that just kind of like exacerbates it. But also, what about like regular people who don't have pre-existing illnesses or anything that would be immediate threats that could possibly end their life sooner or prematurely, but they somehow come up with this virus and then they die? And they was from what you would see, a doctor would, run tests and say this person was in relatively good health, but they still died of the once they contracted the coronavirus. So there might be other things that they're starting to look at as people's blood types, which was ABO, I think they said was the one where in here, if you recall what I was reading, the different people from different regions, and what they inherit through DNA from Neanderthals. And so this is not just coming from my words, but this is coming from, documented research. And they're saying they're speculations, but I feel like they're doing that because they're trying to be safe about their findings, because a lot of times when you come up to say things like this, you got all these people looking at these findings, and then what are we dealing with right now in society? We're dealing with a lot of systemic racism. We're dealing with a lot of protest, a lot of racial divide. And so when you come up with this disease and how it has pretty much put a lot of people in situations that are vulnerable, here you have something that's also including people's DNA, and who could possibly be more susceptible to catching severe cases of this. And so, yes, there has been a lot of systemic racism. There's been a lot of things that have happened over history. But also, you do know that it did mention in this article, which I've heard in multiple articles in the past up to now, that Africa did not have a strong DNA mix with Neanderthals. So I think we want to make that point clear, because that basically, this article, it just actually adds on to the multiple articles that come out that express that. And so that's not just coming from my words, that's coming from findings in documents and stuff. And so as people migrated out of Africa and they came in contact with these Neanderthals, and they interbred. And so that's basically what it says. And so while they may have picked up some immunity or some things that might have been useful, they've also picked up some things that weren't useful. And so that also could create a link as to why some people that get it have a severe case of the disease, other than just having pre-existing health issues. And then also, most of the Black and Hispanic community have had more of their issues with systemic racism, and that seems to be what is the barrier that has caused most of their problems in catching the disease. But it sounds like what this article is pulling out is that if it wasn't people who were experiencing anything like that, and they're not people of color, or they're not in that category where they have just systemic racism and a history of that has caused them to be susceptible. If they're people that aren't of color, in other words, that have like maybe ancestors from the past that have interbred with Neanderthals, that DNA they may share, part of that, and that could be a reason why they get certain outcomes when it comes to contracting the disease. So anyway, I'm gonna let this video go, and so hold on to this, because that's important information. I don't think many people probably understand that is a possibility, that most people will catch things and their reactions to the diseases might be different from the next person. They mention people's age? They mention people's also to inequality and economic status. Some people have health care insurance and others don't. So those play a part in it. And, then you have people that live in poverty, and that plays a part in it, of course. Not having access to good food, not having access to, good doctors, and not having access to medication. But that could be not just with COVID, that could be with any other diseases. But anyway, having said that, I'm going to let this video go. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for listening.